I have two bikes in my fleet that every time I get back on them, especially if it's been a while since I've ridden them, I am just blown away by the ride quality. And that is my Transition Sentinel and now my Niner Jet 9 RDO. So this video is going to be really just a midterm update on the Niner Jet 9. It's by no means going to be a complete review. I just want to talk about some things that I've noticed the first month or so of riding the bike. When I first got on this bike, I felt like it set up kind of high, a little bit tall, and that is because one is the head tube is a little bit longer than some other bikes that I've ridden, and also it has this slacker puck underneath, which slackens the bike about half a degree. So right now it's 67 degrees for the head angle with the slacker puck, and you can see there's about 20 millimeters of stack on this slacker puck. So what I did was I took two spacers out from underneath the stem. So normally I'll run two spacers underneath the stem and typically two on the top to give me some flexibility. With this bike, I actually, as you can see, just took them both out. So what I did was I cut down the fork so I wouldn't have this huge stack of spacers. And, you know, if I were to ever take out the slacker puck, then I could just put, you know, I'll have more room on the fork and I can put a couple spacers underneath. But I am going to leave it like this. I really like it. And I'm going to talk about the ride quality here in a minute. So a real quick update on the components of this bike before I get into the ride quality. The Shimano XT has been absolutely flawless. This is my favorite group set. I'm just going to say it right now. I like SRAM. I've got it on some of my other bikes. I don't mind SRAM at all, but after being on this XT for a while on the RIP 27.5 demo that I have, and now this bike, love it. It's working great. The bar is an 800 millimeter wide bar. I am probably going to trim this down to 780. I had a few tight sections where it was just a little sketchy getting the bike through some trees, but I'm going to ride it for another month or two before I make that decision. Saddle's been good, no complaints with the saddle. The KS Lev dropper post is just buttery smooth. One thing that's really impressed me about this bike is these wheels. I mean, these aren't a really high-end DT Swiss wheel, the 1900s, but honestly, I've been really impressed because normally I would want to put on a set of carbon wheels on a bike like this, like instantly. But this is a stiff wheel set. It's probably not the lightest wheel set out there, and I probably will put a set of carbon wheels on this bike, but I'm not rushing out to do that. And the suspension also has been flawless. I think I mentioned in my first look video of this bike that I kind of wished it came with a 36 in the front. However, after riding this bike for a month or so, I'm changing that because this 34 is great. Now, I thought maybe that I would feel some flex because the Giant Trance that I was riding with a 34, it felt a little more flexy than this bike. Now, I like the Giant Trance, but after riding this bike, I'm realizing it wasn't really the fork. I think it was the frame, and I'll talk about that coming up here in a few minutes, the stiffness of the frame. But this frame is stiff, and again, I like the 34 because I'm not adding a lot of weight to the bike, but the 34 millimeter stanchion tubes are still stiff enough for me. Yesterday I headed down to a trail system, which is one of the only ones open nearby due to the COVID-19 issue. And I was kind of debating, do I take my cross-country bike, which is a Niner RKT9, or do I take the Jet 9? And I decided on the Jet 9 for a couple reasons. One is there's some kind of up and down sections that are really fun where I wanted a little bit slacker bike, and I also wanted a dropper seat post. And when I got down there, I was really glad that I took this bike. And this bike is, the thing that I love about it is how versatile it is. So the trails that I rode yesterday, I did a pretty long cross-country loop. I probably did like 30 miles of just cross-country, just, you know, going at a steady pace and just flowing on the trail. I had a blast on this bike, and it speaks to the versatility of these mid-travel 29ers. So when I had the demo, the Giant Trance 29, I said in the middle of that project that I felt like that was probably the best all-around bike. And it's not just that bike, it's the category. It's the 29ers that have about 130, 140 in the front, and then about 120 in the back. And yesterday's ride was a prime example of how versatile it is. I really didn't feel that much slower on this bike. Now, granted, I haven't been riding my cross-country bike in a while, And you know, let me just kind of talk about that for a second, because it used to be back in the day that everything was either a cross-country bike or a pretty long travel bike. Now that we're getting so many segments in mountain biking, I feel like this style of bike is going to be probably the bike I would recommend to most people. It used to be that when people would ask for a bike recommendation, I'd recommend a cross-country bike, especially people who live around here. But now I would recommend a trail bike like this because of the fact that they're just so versatile. Only the super steep, rugged terrain is where I would choose my enduro bike. Almost for anything else, these mid-travel 29ers are going to be what I'd recommend. So let's get into the ride quality. What impresses me most about the Jet 9 is how playful it is. If you think that a 29er can't be fun and playful, you need to get on a modern crop of 29ers trail bikes. I like how stiff this bike is. I weighed this bike, and I'll put it on the screen, but I'm pretty sure it was 29.5 pounds, which isn't light, but it's not that heavy. And I think the reason why there's maybe a little bit more heft in a bike like this versus a cross country, or even, you know, people are using the term down country, which is kind of between a cross country and trail, and we really don't need more bike categories. Like, we're done, like we have enough. But the reason it's maybe a little bit heavier is because the frame is stiffer, and that is what makes this bike so fun, is how stiff the frame is. I feel like I can pop in and out of corners so well. Now, I mentioned the 67-degree head angle. On paper, with a modern bike, that sounds like it's going to be too steep, but I think Niner have nailed the geometry of this. Inherent with 29ers, you've already got built-in stability. And so having a head angle that's not crazy slack is going to make this bike more playful. And to me, everything comes together on this bike, the geometry and the frame stiffness. Another thing about this bike, I can loft the front wheel easier than almost any other mountain bike I've ridden. I don't know if it's maybe the slacker puck gets everything up a little bit or whatever, but that's another thing that adds to the playfulness of this bike. The trails I was riding yesterday had a lot of sections that were just flowy, and a little up and down, and what I like about this bike is how fun it is to corner. With the 29er versus 27.5, and I'm not really going to go much into that in this video, I'll do that later, but with the 29er, you just feel like you own the corner. Like you just feel like you control the corner, and the bike doesn't wallow around. Another reason why I liked this bike over my cross-country bike yesterday is the bigger tires. So it's been dry and there's some sand, not too bad, but there were some sandy sections, and I appreciated the bigger tires that are on this bike. So they're 2.4s and a 2.5 in the front. And again, it kind of goes to the versatility of this bike. So if you're just heading out and you really don't know what the terrain's going to be like or the soil's going to be like, you just can't go wrong with a bike like this, where you've got really good cornering traction. Again, it's not going to be as light as a cross-country bike, but that doesn't really matter. These 29ers, they're just fun to ride in so many types of terrain. So again, that's my quick midterm update on the Niner Jet 9. I realize this wasn't really so much a review of the bike, but more of this style of bike, the mid-travel 29. This bike is proving to be everything I wanted it to be. The Goldilocks bike. Not too light, not too heavy, not too steep, not too slack. It's probably the bike that I would grab on most rides if I was just going to go out and ride to have fun. If I knew the trails weren't going to be overly steep and technical, and I wasn't heading out for a really fast cross-country ride with other people who are on cross-country bikes, or a race obviously, this would be the bike that I would grab, hands down. So as always, questions or comments, drop those below, and follow me on Instagram at ClintG37. Thanks for watching.